So, life in water. You would think that it would be pretty easy, right? But there's really a challenge to get this balance between salt and water. Our cell membranes are semi-permeable. So here's your little cell membrane, which means some things can come in and some things can go out. Really small molecules have a pretty good way of getting in and out, diffusing in and out. Water can diffuse in and out of these things called aquaporons. But it also depends on like what type of water you live in. Do you live in fresh water? Do you live in salt water? So it might surprise you that an aquatic environment needs specialized mechanisms to keep the proper amount of water or salt in their body. So passive transport, this is when you don't require any energy to move things along a gradient. And so your passive transport is just like types of diffusion, moving from areas of high concentration down to areas of low concentration. So if you have like a bunch of salt over here, it's going to spread out until it's even. So it's going to go from where there's a lot of salt to where there's a little salt until you reach an equilibrium. Active transport requires energy. It requires ATP. And what you do is you go against that gradient. So you have a low concentration in here, but you want to get it even lower. And so you push against that gradient to where there's a high concentration to get whatever is in here out. Osmosis is just like the diffusion of water. So it's water moving from a high concentration of water to an area of low concentration of water. And there's this thing called osmotic potential, to where depending on the solution, what its pull is for water. So water, it likes to party. It wants to go where there's a lot of particles to go party. And so if you have like a salt solution that is 5% salt and a salt solution that is 10% salt, the water wants to move from that 5 to the 10. And so that's the osmotic potential, this force that is pulling that water to it. Water also can have pressure potential because it does have a pretty high viscosity that you can push against it. And so you can push water a direction. If the pressure is higher over here, it's going to push the water away. And so that's actually how your blood vessels work. When you get to those capillaries, you have high pressure on one end pushing the fluid out. When you get to the veins, you have low pressure, and you also have an osmotic potential difference where the albumin in your blood causes the pull of water back into your veins. It's pretty cool stuff. But talking about aquatic organisms living in water and what adaptations you need adaptations for osmoregulation. So to keep that right balance of water. And like I said earlier, it's going to be different if you're living in freshwater versus saltwater. So when you're living in freshwater, you're in this hyperosmotic area. And so there is a lot of water out here and a lot of solutes in this fish. And so the water is going to want to go inside the fish. And so the fish take up this water through their mouth, through their gills as they're eating and as they're breathing. The water comes into their body, and it has to figure out a way to keep that water out and keep all the salts and nutrients that it needs in. And so a lot of the ways that they do that is just by getting rid of any extra water through urine and just pee it out. And they have like special mechanisms that keep the salt in the blood or whatever other minerals, vitamins in the blood. Versus if you're in a saltwater environment, you're in a hypoosmotic environment, meaning that the salt water has more stuff in it than your body. And so the water wants to leave the body. So it wants to diffuse out. And so you have to come up with some neat tricks to keep the water in and not leaving your body via osmosis. And so some ways that these saltwater organisms make sure they get enough water is by drinking it. So they drink a whole bunch of the salt water, and then they excrete out a ton of that salt. They can do it like through their urine, or they can do it, if it's a fish, like out their gills. And so here you can just kind of see some different ways that the freshwater, saltwater fish deal with their environments, that hyperosmotic and that hypoosmotic, where they drink a ton, they're going to be losing a ton through their gills, but then the urine is really, really concentrated, and so it's really salty, and they get rid of it. And then in the fish, it's the complete opposite. So they're bringing in all this fresh water, and when they pee, it is really watery, and they keep in most of those nutrients in their bodies. Sharks and dolphins kind of do a little bit different. So sharks and dolphins, so your dolphins and sharks, they both eat food, make ammonia. The dolphins just excrete the ammonia. The sharks actually retain this thing called urea. So it's a main product of pee. So in us, when we eat protein, we break it down into the amino acids, and we can do this thing called deamination, where you pull off a nitrogen. That nitrogen turns to ammonia. Ammonia is not good to have in your body, and so our body changes it to urea, and so it's a less dangerous chemical molecule, and you then wait until you have to pee, and then you get rid of that urea. The sharks will actually retain some of that urea, and so that increased urea actually increases the osmotic pressure in their bodies, and so they lose less water because they have increased solutes in their body. Typically, for us, we keep our uric levels around 0.03% in our blood. If it gets any higher, we can get stuff like gout. Sharks can have theirs up to 2.5%. So we're like 0.03, and they can go up to 2.5. I had a friend who said he ate shark before, and he was like, it really tastes like pee. And now you know why. Because they can retain a lot of that urea. For plants, plants need a lot of water. And if you have any plants growing in salt water, like these mangroves, they have to come up with unique ways to get rid of that salt and pull in more water. And so you'll find they have a lot of organic molecules down here in their roots to cause that osmotic pressure to be a lot higher than the salt water, and so it's able to pull in the water that way. And you can also see that they can excrete salt up here from their leaves, and so that helps to pull the water all the way through the tree. They do that with active transport. Alright, so what is the difference between active and passive transport? Active transport requires energy. Passive transport happens passively. Hyperosmotic is when you have your fish in freshwater, and that freshwater wants to move into the fish. Hypoosmotic is the salt water, where the water wants to leave your fish, or animal, or plant, or whatever. Think about some of the adaptations we talked about, osmoregulation in our freshwater animals, saltwater animals, and our plants. And we will pick up with gas diffusion